The day the letter arrived, my brother's name was printed in gold ink. Mine wasn't there at all. My name is Theodore Carter, and if you'd told me a month ago that a single piece of paper could tear open every quiet corner of our family, I would have laughed. We weren't rich, but we were steady. Sunday dinners that always ended with burnt toast and bad jokes, the kind of simple life you don't question because you think you already know everyone's story. That illusion ended the morning the letter came. The envelope didn't look ordinary. It was thick, cream-colored, sealed with wax stamped in gold. The handwriting on it was perfect, deliberate, and addressed only to my brother, Ethan Carter. My name wasn't anywhere, not even in the corner. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, still half asleep, coffee mug in hand, when Ethan walked in holding the envelope like it might bite him. Probably some scam, I joked. If it asks for your bank info, just send them mine instead. He didn't laugh. His fingers were trembling as he broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet on heavy letterhead that read, Hargrove and Associates, legal representation for St. Helena's Orphanage Trust. That name hit the air like a dropped plate. St. Helena's Orphanage. Ethan's childhood shadow. The place he'd come from before Mom and Dad adopted him at 5. The place no one ever mentioned after the papers were signed. He read the first few lines in silence, eyes darting left to right, then stopping. The color drained from his face. Dear Mr. Ethan Carter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been named the sole heir of a private trust valued at approximately $70 million, established by a late anonymous benefactor connected to St. Helena's Orphanage. For a full 10 seconds, the kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. 70 what? I whispered. Ethan handed me the letter, his voice barely steady. It says 70 million. From someone I've never met. I scanned the rest, dates, signatures, and an instruction to contact the law firm immediately. It sounded absurd, like something ripped from a cheap TV drama. That morning turned heavy fast. Mom's fork froze midair at breakfast when we read the letter aloud. Dad kept rereading the numbers, his jaw tightening each time. No one could figure out who would leave that kind of fortune to my brother. Why an orphanage trust? Why now? Dinner that night was worse. Every sound, the clink of a glass, the scrape of a chair, felt loud. Ethan sat stiff, eyes lowered while Dad tried to act calm. I couldn't eat. The questions kept stacking in my head like dominoes ready to fall. Why Ethan? Why only him? What about me? He was quiet the whole evening, tracing his finger over the embossed seal on the envelope like it was some kind of relic. I told him maybe it was a mistake, that maybe they meant another Ethan Carter. But deep down, something cold settled in my chest, a mix of jealousy and something darker I couldn't name. Later, after everyone went to bed, I caught him sitting in the living room with the letter under a lamp. The light made his eyes shine in a way I'd never seen before, half wonder, half fear. I don't even remember anyone there who could have done this, he said softly. I was too young. I nodded, pretending to be understanding, but my mind was racing. A mysterious benefactor. An orphanage. A sum so absurd it could rewrite a person's life overnight. When he finally went upstairs, I lingered. That envelope still sat on the table, edges curling slightly from the heat of the lamp. I shouldn't have, but I picked it up again. At the bottom of the letter, just above the signature of Harold Hargrove, Esquerdo, was a final line I hadn't noticed before. The benefactor's relation to you is closer than you realize. I read it twice, then a third time. The words seemed to hum under the paper, pulsing like a heartbeat. Closer than you realize. That was the moment everything shifted. The night curiosity began to feel like danger, and I realized that whatever secret tied my brother to that orphanage, it wasn't just his to carry. It started as a joke, the idea that our family might have secrets. But jokes turn dark when money's involved. For a while, I tried to pretend things were normal. But after that letter, nothing felt normal anymore. Ethan had stopped sleeping properly. He'd wake up early, pacing the living room, staring at his phone like it held the answers. And every time I'd ask what the lawyer said, he'd just shake his head and mutter, "They're still verifying details." Details, $70 million worth of them. Growing up, Ethan had always been the calm one, quiet, steady, the kind of brother everyone trusted. He was adopted when he was 5, the year after Mom and Dad got married. They never had biological kids of their own until me, and even though we grew up under the same roof, there was always this faint, unspoken line between us. He was chosen. I was just born. Mom would never admit it, but she looked at him differently, softer, like she owed him something. Dad treated us equally, or tried to, but I could see how he'd lean a little closer when Ethan spoke, how he'd laugh harder at his jokes. I told myself it didn't matter, until now. When the inheritance letter came, that old feeling of being less special came flooding back. And every time Ethan's phone buzzed with another call from the lawyer, I felt it sting a little more. 2 days after the letter, a message came through. From Hargrove and Associates. Subject, appointment confirmation. Carter Family Trust consultation. Mom insisted we all go. Even Dad, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The law office was everything you'd expect from people who deal in millions. Marble floors, glass walls, silence so heavy you could hear your heartbeat. Mr. Harold Hargrove was an older man with perfect posture, gray hair combed back like a politician, and eyes that missed nothing. He shook Ethan's hand first. Of course. Then mine, briefly, like a formality. "Thank you for coming," he said, lowering himself into his leather chair. "This is regarding the inheritance from St. Helena's Orphanage Trust." I noticed the way he said Ethan's name every time, carefully, respectfully. Mine didn't come up once. He opened a folder filled with documents sealed with gold ribbons. "Mr. Carter," he said to Ethan, "you have been designated as the primary heir of the Lennox Benefactor Fund, established decades ago under specific conditions." "Lennox?" I asked. "Who's that?" Mr. Hargrove gave me a polite, distant smile. The benefactor preferred anonymity, but records trace the original trust to a group of donors who supported St. Helena's in the 1980s and 90s. Mom's face went pale. Her hand clenched the armrest. "Are there any conditions?" Ethan asked quietly. Mr. Hargrove nodded. "There are always conditions in matters of legacy. The benefactor's will outlined a series of responsibilities. You will be briefed on them in due course." Something about his tone made me uneasy. He began asking Ethan a list of odd questions. Did he remember any mentors at the orphanage? Any visitors during his time there? Any objects or gifts given to him before adoption? Ethan kept shaking his head. I was too young. I barely remember faces. Then Hargrove turned a page and looked at me. "And you, Theodore? Were you adopted as well?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said slowly. "I was born after Ethan came home." He nodded, jotting something down. His pen hovered just long enough to make it feel like my answer mattered more than it should have. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad finally broke it. "Look, Mr. Hargrove, this is all very strange. My son's an honest man. If this inheritance is legitimate, we'll cooperate. But if this is some kind of publicity stunt—" Hargrove raised a hand, calm but firm. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, this is no stunt. The trust was designed long before any of us were involved. However," he paused, his gaze flicking briefly toward Ethan, "the circumstances of how and why the benefactor chose him are unusual." Mom spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, unusual?" Hargrove cleared his throat. "Certain parts of the original documentation were sealed by the court at the benefactor's request. Access is restricted until further verification." Ethan frowned. "Verification of what?" "Identity," Hargrove said simply. That word hung in the air like smoke. When we left the office, the tension was unbearable. Ethan walked ahead, shoving the envelope of documents into his jacket pocket. Dad kept muttering about legal nonsense. Mom was silent, completely silent, eyes glassy like she'd seen a ghost. Back home, I confronted her in the kitchen while the others were upstairs. "You know something," I said. "About St. Helena's, about Ethan." Her hands froze over the sink. For a moment I thought she'd deny it, but instead she whispered, "Some truths wait for their own time, Theodore. Don't force them before they're ready." It wasn't an answer. It was a warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the meeting. Hargrove's careful tone, the strange look in Mom's eyes. Why did everyone act like Ethan's past was a bomb waiting to go off? And what did he mean by verification of identity? The next morning, Ethan was gone early again, said he was going back to the lawyer's office alone. When he returned hours later, he looked pale, shaken. He avoided my eyes, mumbled something about more paperwork, then locked himself in his room. I stood outside his door for a long time, listening to the faint rustle of paper inside. Something was changing between us. Something I couldn't stop and wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. The following evening, the phone rang. It was Mr. Hargrove, for me. "Theodore," he said, his tone measured, "I just wanted to clarify one detail from our earlier meeting." "What detail?" I asked. He hesitated. I could hear pages flipping in the background. "The benefactor left very specific instructions," he said finally. One child was to be informed immediately. The other was to remain unaware. Unaware of what? I demanded. There was a brief pause, then his voice dropped almost a whisper. Until the time was right. And before I could ask another word, he hung up. The smell of old wood and dust greeted us as if the walls themselves were hiding secrets. 2 days after that cryptic call from Mr. Hargrove, Ethan told me he was going back to St. Helena's. He said it like he'd been thinking about it for days. Ike the orphanage itself was calling him back. I didn't ask permission. I just said, "I'm coming with you." The drive took nearly 3 hours. The road wound through long stretches of countryside, the kind that feels untouched by time. Neither of us spoke much. The silence between us had grown thick, layered with questions neither dared to ask aloud. When we finally turned the corner and saw the building, it didn't look like the place where a $70 million mystery should begin. It looked like something forgotten, an old stone structure leaning against the wind, its sign faded and half broken. St. Helena's, Orphanage, Est. 1954. A rusted gate creaked as we pushed it open. Wild grass had swallowed most of the courtyard. A single bell tower leaned slightly to one side, its rope frayed and hanging like a loose thread. Inside, the air was thick with dust and age. The wooden floors moaned under every step, and the smell, that strange blend of paper, wax, and rain-soaked stone, felt alive, almost watchful. At the far end of the hall, an old woman appeared, thin, frail, her white hair tucked beneath a faded blue habit. Her name tag, nearly falling off, read Sister Mary Ann. She studied us for a long moment before speaking. "You're back," she said quietly, her voice carrying a tremor of recognition as she looked at Ethan. Ethan froze. You remember me?" Her smile was small, wistful. Some faces don't fade, even when the walls do. We followed her down a narrow corridor lined with photographs of children smiling in black and white frames, staff in uniforms from another century. Each photo had a brass tag beneath it. Most of the names were worn away. Sister Mary Ann led us into what used to be the records room. A row of cabinets leaned against cracked plaster walls, their drawers labeled in faint, fading ink. "This is all that remains," she said, motioning toward them. The rest was taken when the trust changed hands. Ethan exchanged a glance with me. "The trust? You mean the one connected to the inheritance?" Her eyes flickered. Yes, the benefactor was very precise. Not everything was meant to be found. I stepped closer to one of the cabinets. "Can we look?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Be gentle. Some truths crumble if you touch them too roughly." We began pulling out drawers, each one filled with brittle papers, old ledgers, donation receipts, the history of forgotten lives. Most of it made no sense. Names crossed out, pages torn, stamps from offices long dissolved. Then, in the third cabinet from the left, Ethan stopped. He'd found a thick book, leather-bound, edges darkened with age. The cover read, Orphanage Ledger, 1980-1990. He placed it on the desk and opened it carefully. Inside were rows of handwritten entries, columns for each child's name, date of arrival, and sponsor information. We turned the pages slowly, decade by decade, until we reached 1988. And there, halfway down the list, was his name. Child, Secret 47. Ethan Carter. Next to it, special allocation, 30% share. Ethan leaned closer. What does that mean? Before I could answer, I saw something scribbled in the margin, written in smaller, sharper handwriting, almost like it had been added later. Kept under trust, secondary beneficiary unlisted. The words blurred for a moment as my pulse began to race. Secondary beneficiary. The phrase felt like a hook buried under my skin. I pointed to it. Does that mean there's another heir? Sister Mary Ann's expression darkened. She took a slow step toward the ledger, her trembling fingers brushing the page as if touching it brought back ghosts. That note wasn't part of the original record, she murmured. It was added years later, after the benefactor's last visit. Ethan's voice cracked. Do you know who the benefactor was? She hesitated, eyes darting between us. Some said he was a man of great means. Others said he was a man running from guilt. What kind of guilt? I asked. Her gaze fell to the page again. The kind that leaves a fortune behind instead of an apology. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I could hear the faint tick of a wall clock somewhere in the distance, though I couldn't see it. Ethan turned the page, hoping for more clues, but the next entries were crossed out, blacked over with ink so dense it had bled through the paper. Only fragments remained, a few words here and there. Agreement, trust clause, proof withheld. Then something strange happened. As Ethan lifted the back cover of the ledger, a folded paper slipped out and fell to the floor. I picked it up. It was a faded, creased of two boys standing outside the orphanage gates. One was clearly Ethan, about 4 or 5 years old. The other boy looked familiar. I stared at the face, my stomach twisting. He looked like me. Ethan frowned. Who's that? Sister Mary Ann took the photo gently from my hand, studying it for a long moment before whispering, That picture was taken the week before your adoption. I waited for her to explain, but she didn't. Instead, she looked out the window, her eyes glassy as if seeing ghosts only she could recognize. The orphanage kept secrets, she said softly. Not all of them were ours to tell. Please, I said. If you know something, we deserve to understand. Her lips trembled. Understand? My dear boy, understanding can ruin people. Ethan's jaw tightened. We just want the truth. She turned to him, her voice lowering to a near whisper. Then listen carefully, child. The truth isn't in money. Her eyes moved between us, first Ethan, then me, before she finished, almost trembling. It's in blood. Some inherit money. Others inherit secrets. My brother inherited both. After our visit to St. Helena's, neither of us spoke for hours. The road home was long and silent, the kind of silence that hums with questions you don't want answered. Ethan stared out the window the whole time, that old photo clenched in his hand. I couldn't stop thinking about Sister Mary Ann's last words. The truth isn't in money. It's in the blood. When we reached home, Mom was waiting by the kitchen window. Her face told me everything. He already knew we'd gone. The moment Ethan showed her the photograph, her color drained. She pressed her lips together, whispering, You shouldn't have gone there. But she didn't ask what we found. And she didn't deny anything either. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ledger, the word secondary beneficiary, that familiar face in the photo, it all looped in my head until dawn. By morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I called Mr. Hargrove's office. He agreed to see me that afternoon. When I arrived, he was already standing by the window of his office, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city. On the desk in front of him were 2 new folders, thick, sealed, each marked with the name Arthur Lennox. I suppose you've heard the name, he said without turning around. I frowned. Should I have? He finally faced me. Arthur Lennox was the benefactor behind the St. Helena's Trust, a very wealthy investor and philanthropist. He passed away in 2010, under unusual circumstances. He slid a photo across the desk, a black and white portrait of a man in his 50s, sharp features, confident smile, eyes that seemed to look right through you. Ethan never met him, Hargrove continued. But Lennox visited St. Helena's multiple times. Records show he had a particular interest in the children of that year, especially one child. I didn't need to ask which one. Hargrove flipped open another file. Inside were copies of signed documents, letters, and several checks made out to St. Helena's Orphanage, 1988. In the memo line, one caught my eye. For E. Carter allocation transfer, imidor hadru anin. My throat went dry. He personally paid into Ethan's trust? Yes, Hargrove said. He established what he called the Lennox Benefactor Fund. But the trail doesn't end there. Mr. Lennox's business holdings were tied to several companies, one of which, quite interestingly, had direct partnerships with your father's firm during the late 1980s. I blinked. My father? You're saying they knew each other? Hargrove gave a faint, practiced smile. I'm saying their paths crossed financially, at least. Whether they knew each other is another matter. A chill crept up my spine. Dad had never mentioned a man named Lennox. But then again, he'd never mentioned a lot of things. I left the office that day with my head spinning. Arthur Lennox, a dead investor with ties to our family, a mysterious trust, and a handwritten note about blood. Everything pointed to one terrifying possibility. This wasn't charity. This was legacy. That evening, I tried to confront Dad. He was in his study, surrounded by stacks of old files and invoices. Dad, I said quietly, did you ever know someone named Arthur Lennox? He looked up, confused or pretending to be. Lennox? No. Why? His company worked with yours, back in the late 80s. For a split second his jaw tightened. Then he looked away, riffling through papers. Son, that was decades ago. We worked with dozens of firms. Don't read too much into it, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes before he turned. He knew something. Later, as I passed the hallway, I heard him talking quietly to Mom. They've started asking questions, he said. We can't let this come out now. My chest went cold. What was this? The next day, Ethan got a call from Hargrove himself. I insisted on going with him. When we entered the law firm again, the air felt heavier, like the whole building knew something we didn't. Hargrove motioned for us to sit. I have more information, he said. Mr. Lennox's estate was complicated. There were properties, assets, trusts, and one additional sealed document. Ethan leaned forward. Sealed? Yes, it was discovered among his personal effects and marked with a very specific instruction that it be opened only after verification of identity. He looked at me then, eyes narrowing slightly. And it appears there are actually 2 such envelopes. 2? I asked. One for Ethan, Hargrove said slowly, and one for you. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. Me? Why would a man I've never met leave me anything? He clasped his hands on the table. That's what I intend to find out. But I can tell you this much. Both envelopes came from the same vault where Mr. Lennox kept his personal will. They're marked with your full name, Theodore Carter, handwritten by Lennox himself. Ethan looked at me bewildered. What's going on? I didn't know how to answer. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Hargrove continued, his tone softer now. Ethan's envelope has already been authorized for opening. Yours, however, must wait until I receive final approval from the trust board. That was Lennox's explicit request. Why? I asked. What could possibly be inside? He hesitated, studying me like he wanted to say more but couldn't. Then he simply said, Mr. Lennox was known for 2 things, his generosity and his secrets. We left the office in silence. Ethan clutched his envelope so tightly that the edges bent under his fingers. I couldn't stop staring at it, that slim piece of paper that had somehow decided both of our fates. When we reached the parking lot, he turned to me. What if this guy wasn't just some stranger? He said. What if he knew us? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already feared he was right. That night, I sat at my desk, turning the events over in my head. A dead man, a fortune, a connection to my father, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. Every thread of this mystery led back to one place, the orphanage, and maybe to a truth none of us were ready to face. The phone rang. It was Mr. Hargrove again. His voice was lower this time, almost cautious. Theodore, he said, I have the authorization. You may collect your envelope tomorrow morning. I swallowed hard. Does Ethan know? No, he replied, and I suggest you keep it that way for now. There was a brief pause, and then he added something I'll never forget. Mr. Lennox left one final instruction with your letter. He said, when Theodore reads this, the truth will finally balance. And before I could speak, he ended the call. I opened the envelope expecting closure. Instead, I found a birth certificate with my mother's name and someone else's signature. The next morning, the world looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The sky was the same dull gray, the street outside my window the same, but something in me had shifted. Today, I was going to open a letter from a man who had been dead for 15 years, a man who somehow knew my name. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into Hargrove and Associates. The receptionist looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Carter?" I nodded. She handed me a small, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax, my name written in tight, elegant handwriting. Theodore Carter. Mr. Hargrove stepped out of his office just as I turned it over in my hand. "Before you open it," he said softly, "you should know this may change how you see everything." I tried to smile. "You've been saying that since we met." He didn't smile back. "This time I mean it." I waited until I got home. Ethan was out visiting the bank about his inheritance. Mom was in the garden, pretending to prune roses that had already been trimmed. Dad was in his study, the door closed. I sat at the dining room table, the morning light cutting through the blinds, stripes of gold across the envelope. My fingers hesitated, then tore the seal. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a thin document, and something that felt metallic beneath them. I unfolded the letter first. "My dear Theodore, by the time you read this, the truth will already be circling you. I ask only that you read with understanding, not anger. There are 2 sons in this story, one who knows where he came from and one who never will, unless he opens this letter. Arthur Lennox." My pulse quickened. I set the letter aside and picked up the document underneath. It was a birth certificate. My eyes ran across the lines until they froze. Mother, Elena Carter. Father, Arthur Lennox. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. No breath, no thought, just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mom's name, Arthur's signature, not my father's. My first instinct was denial, that this was fake, some mistake, some cruel trick. But the paper was aged, the signatures real, the official stamp unmistakable. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal like maybe I could rub the truth away. I felt sick. All those years, every family dinner, every photo on the wall replayed in my head like a broken film. The way Mom used to flinch whenever Ethan talked about the orphanage. The way she'd avoid my eyes when I asked about the past. Suddenly, it all made sense. She hadn't been afraid of the money. She'd been afraid of the truth. I stormed outside. Mom was still in the garden, her gloved hands trembling around the shears. When she saw the paper in my hand, the color drained from her face. "Theodore," she whispered, "where did you—" "From him," I snapped. "From Arthur Lennox." The shears slipped from her hand and fell into the dirt. "Please," she said quietly, "not here." I followed her inside. She sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. "I worked at Lennox Holdings," she said finally. "It was before I met your father. I was young. I thought it was just an internship. Arthur was older, kind, and brilliant. He helped me through college, and then I found out I was pregnant." I could barely speak. "So Ethan," she nodded slowly. "Ethan was his son. Arthur arranged for him to be cared for until I could start over. Your father knew about the adoption, but he didn't know the rest." "And me?" I whispered. "Where do I fit into this mess?" Her eyes lifted, glistening with tears. "You were my second chance, Theo. I promised myself I'd never lie again. But life doesn't keep those promises easily." Anger and heartbreak twisted together inside me. "All this time," I said, voice shaking, "you let us grow up as brothers. Without ever telling us we didn't share the same father? I wanted you to be equals," she said, tears spilling now. "Arthur insisted on secrecy. He said he'd handle Ethan's future, that he'd provide for him in ways I couldn't." I laughed bitterly. $70 million worth of guilt? She winced. It wasn't supposed to be about money. He said it was about setting things right. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was telling the truth. But truth doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it just breaks things cleanly so you can see what was already fractured. I went back to the letter and read the final paragraph. Theodore, you and your brother are bound by more than bloodlines or law. The world may see inheritance as wealth, but for me, it was penance. I could not be there to raise my first son, but I could make sure he was never left behind again. In the vault at St. Helena's lies everything I could not say. The key is with you. I turned the envelope over, and sure enough, a small metal key slid out and hit the table with a dull clink. Attached to it was a faded tag. Orphanage Vault 3B. My hands trembled as I held it. The same orphanage. The same vault number I'd seen in the old ledger. For a second, I thought I heard Ethan's voice behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. Just the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, counting down to something I couldn't yet name. I folded the letter, slid the key into my pocket, and stared at the sunlight on the table. Arthur Lennox wasn't just Ethan's benefactor. He was my mother's secret. And maybe, in some twisted way, mine too. Because if Ethan was his first son, then what did that make me? I didn't have the answer yet, but I had the key, and I knew exactly where I was going next. Vault 3B wasn't on any of the orphanage maps, and maybe that's why it still held what everyone else forgot. The night we returned to St. Helena's, the sky was a heavy shade of black, the kind that swallowed the moon whole. Ethan drove, silent and pale, his hands gripping the wheel hard enough to make the veins in his arms stand out. Neither of us had spoken much since I showed him the letter. I hadn't told him everything about the birth certificate or the key, but I told him enough to make him come with me. He parked the car just outside the old gate. The metal groaned in protest as we pushed it open. Wind carried through the empty courtyard, scattering leaves and old paper like ghosts too light to rest. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered. "No," I said honestly, "but I have to see what's inside." The orphanage loomed ahead, dark and quiet, its windows like blind eyes staring down at us. We moved through the main hall, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the dust. Each step echoed, hollow and uneasy. The building smelled the same, damp wood, old fabric, the faint sting of disinfectant that never quite left the walls. We passed the old nursery, the faded playroom, the records office where we'd found the ledger. The air grew colder the deeper we went. Finally, we reached the basement staircase, steep, narrow, carved from stone. I pulled the small key from my pocket. Its tag, Vault 3B, glinted faintly in the light. When we reached the bottom, the concrete corridor stretched out ahead of us. A row of heavy metal doors, most marked with peeling paint and faded numbers. 3A, 3B, 3C. Ethan's flashlight trembled slightly as he pointed it toward the middle door. There it was, 3B, the numbers etched deep into rust. He swallowed hard. "If this is what I think it is, then we stop guessing," I said. "We find out." The key slid in with a soft click. For a second it wouldn't turn then, with a snap that echoed through the corridor, it did. The lock gave way, and the door creaked open like something exhaling after a long sleep. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with dust, old paper, and something else. Something metallic. We stepped in. The beam of my flashlight swept across shelves lined with boxes, folders, and reels of tape, each labeled in careful handwriting. Lennox Trust. Records, 1980, 2010. Orphan Files, Private Correspondence, Restricted. Ethan moved closer to one of the shelves, brushing the dust away. He picked up a box and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, black and white images of children, lined up in the orphanage yard. Each photo was stamped property of St. Helena's Trust. But it was the letters that froze us. Bundles of them, tied with old string, each signed the same way. A. L. Arthur Lennox. Ethan flipped through them with shaking hands. Most were routine. Notes about funding, reports on child welfare, instructions for staff. But one set was different, envelopes addressed directly to our mother, Elena Carter. I took one and unfolded it carefully. The paper was yellowed, but the handwriting was strong and precise. "Helena, you must understand why this must remain secret. Our agreement ensures both boys are protected, one under my trust, one under your care. Their futures must remain separate until the right time. I promise to provide for the child at St. Helena's, and I will. But you must promise never to reveal what binds them." I read it twice. The words hit like a weight to the chest. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "He's talking about us." I nodded slowly. He wanted us apart. On purpose. He sank down against the wall, the letter trembling in his hands. "I grew up thinking we were brothers because love made us family," he said quietly. "Turns out we were brothers because a stranger decided it." I didn't know what to say. The truth was heavy and cruel in its precision. I kept reading through the stack. Each letter revealed more of the same story. Secret payments, coded instructions, arrangements with lawyers and caretakers. Arthur had orchestrated everything: the adoption, the trust, the timing. He'd hidden Ethan in plain sight and left me to live the life he could never claim. But one folder at the bottom of the pile caught my attention. It was sealed in a plastic sleeve, stamped in red ink. "Carter, Family Confidential." The seal cracked open easily after all these years. Inside were a few photographs, our mother, younger, standing beside Arthur Lennox outside what looked like an office building. Her smile was nervous. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. Behind them, a sign read, "Lennox Holdings, 1987. Beneath the photos were typed letters, contracts, signed agreements, and legal statements. I skimmed through until one paragraph made my stomach twist. In the event that the primary heir, Ethan Carter, fails to fulfill the designated clause of the trust, all assets and associated rights shall be transferred to the secondary heir as recorded under the Carter estate. I read it aloud. Ethan's head shot up. What clause? I flipped through the other pages, searching for it, but it wasn't there. Only references, fragments, completion of duty, orphanage continuation, conditions unmet. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The silence in the vault grew louder, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Ethan stood slowly, his voice trembling. "He never wanted to just leave me money," he said. "He wanted me to do something. Something I haven't done yet." I looked at him, the weight of that clause settling between us. "If you fail to fulfill it," I said softly, "it passes to the second son." His eyes met mine, realization dawning, sharp and painful. "You," he whispered. "You're the second son." Before I could respond, a faint creak echoed from the hallway behind us. We froze. Light spilled across the floor from the corridor, footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate. Ethan turned off his flashlight. The vault plunged into darkness. I could hear my heart pounding, echoing off the stone. Then a voice. "Ow." Familiar, coming from the shadows beyond the door. "You shouldn't have opened that vault." And the door began to close. Suddenly, $70 million wasn't the only thing on the line. It was the truth about who we really were. The door slammed open before we could even move. The flashlight beam caught a familiar face, Mr. Hargrove. He stood in the doorway of the vault, breathing hard, his overcoat damp from the rain outside. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to interfere with sealed documents?" Ethan's voice cracked. We had a right to know. Hargrove's eyes darted to the open folders, the scattered letters, the photos of our mother. His face drained of color. Then, with a deep sigh, he said quietly, "I suppose you were bound to find it eventually." He stepped inside, his shoes crunching against old papers. "The clause," he muttered. "You've seen it?" I nodded. "It says if Ethan fails to fulfill some kind of condition, the inheritance goes to the second son." "What does that mean?" Hargrove adjusted his glasses, his expression tightening. "It means exactly what it says. The trust wasn't built on money alone. It was built on obligation." Ethan frowned. "Obligation to do what?" "To continue what Arthur Lennox began," Hargrove replied. "The orphanage. The trust requires that the heir oversee its operation and fund its restoration for a period of 5 years. Only then does full ownership of the estate and its assets transfer permanently." Ethan took a step back. "You mean I have to run this place?" Yes, Hargrove said simply. Or the inheritance defaults. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. You've got to be kidding. I'm not a businessman. I'm not a philanthropist. I barely have a clue how to manage something like this. Hargrove's tone stayed calm, professional, but firm. The clause was written this way for a reason. Arthur Lennox wanted to ensure his son understood service before ownership. Ethan's voice rose. Service. He abandoned me. He left me in this place like some unwanted relic, and now he expects me to serve it. Hargrove didn't flinch. He also left you $70 million, Mr. Carter. Perhaps he believed both debts could be repaid at once. Ethan turned away, running his hands through his hair. This is insane, he said. I didn't ask for any of this. I stood there in the flickering light watching him unravel. Part of me wanted to comfort him. Another part, the part that had always stood in his shadow, felt something else. A spark, not of sympathy, but of possibility. The clause echoed in my head like a heartbeat. If Ethan fails to fulfill the condition, the inheritance passes to the second son. For the first time, I wondered what that meant for me, for the boy who wasn't chosen, for the son who never had a name in the ledger. Maybe this is your chance to do something good, I said quietly. Ethan spun around, eyes sharp. What's that supposed to mean? Maybe he wanted to see who you'd become, I said. You could turn this place around, help the kids here. He cut me off, his voice snapping like a whip. Don't act like you understand. You didn't grow up here. You didn't live in these walls or wonder why no one ever came back for you. His words stung deeper than I expected. Maybe not, I said. But I also didn't grow up with everyone calling me special, Ethan. You got the letter, the fortune, the sympathy, and somehow you're still the victim. His jaw clenched. You think I wanted this? You think I asked for a father I never met to leave me a burden dressed up as a gift? I didn't answer, because maybe he was right, but all I could see was the opportunity, the one thing life had never given me. He shook his head, laughing bitterly. You know what? Maybe that's what you've wanted all along, for me to fail. So you can finally have something that's mine. That's not true, I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. The air between us grew thick, electric. The kind of silence that holds back years of words neither of us had dared to say. Ethan's flashlight beam swept across the vault walls, the shelves, the dust, the papers until it landed on the open folder marked Carter Family. Confidential. He stared at it for a long moment, then at me. This place ruined everything, he said quietly. You, me, Mom, Dad, all of it. Because of a man who couldn't face his own mistakes. He turned toward the door. Where are you going? I asked. Anywhere but here. Ethan, he stopped, his voice breaking. I can't do this. I can't live his life for him. I don't care about the money anymore. He started walking again, faster this time, his footsteps echoing up the corridor until they faded into silence. I stood there alone, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I tried to breathe. Hargrove exhaled slowly, picking up one of the scattered papers. He's walking away from everything, he said softly, just like his father did. I crouched down, gathering the letters into a neat pile. Among them was a set of legal documents, the official trust papers, each signed, stamped, but incomplete. Ethan had left them behind. His name was printed neatly at the bottom, waiting for one last signature that would confirm his acceptance of the clause. But the line remained blank. My eyes lingered on it for a long time before Hargrove spoke again. You know, Theodore, he said carefully, if Ethan refuses to fulfill the obligation, the clause is very clear about succession. I looked up at him. And what happens then? He hesitated. Then the trust passes to the secondary heir, you. I felt something shift inside me, a dangerous, thrilling kind of silence. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the papers in my hands and thought about what it would mean to finally have something that was mine. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Rain began to fall again, echoing through the orphanage halls like distant applause. When I finally stepped out of the vault, the papers were still in my hand, and Ethan was gone. Secrets don't stay buried, not when the press smells money. It started with a headline, then two, then a dozen more. By the end of the week, our story, or what the world thought was our story, was everywhere. Mystery heir inherits $70 million from dead philanthropist. Orphanage tied to hidden fortune. Who really is Ethan Carter? Our faces were splashed across the new. Ethan's photograph from a social media post he hadn't used in years. My name printed underneath as the younger brother. They called us the Orphanage heirs. They made it sound glamorous, tragic, cinematic. It wasn't. By the time the first reporter showed up at our front gate, Mom had stopped answering the phone. Dad had locked himself in his study again, pretending not to exist. Ethan disappeared into his room, curtains drawn, the world shut out. And me. I watched it all unfold like a stranger watching his own house burn down. The first wave of articles was harmless. Speculation, background, and curiosity. But then came the second wave, the investigations. Someone dug up Mom's work history at Lennox Holdings, complete with an old employee photo. Her standing beside Arthur Lennox, smiling nervously. Then came the rumors, the dates, the birth records. By the third day, the internet had already done what it does best. It built a story that sounded true enough to ruin lives. Elena Carter, the secret mistress behind the Lennox fortune. Was the $70 million inheritance hush money? The photos, the timelines, the gossip. It all fit just close enough to reality to feel undeniable. Mom barely left her room. Dad stopped going to work altogether. And Ethan stopped being Ethan. He turned off his phone, deleted his email, and moved into a small rental house near the outskirts of town. Hargrove tried to reach him, but every call went unanswered. The day the first camera crew parked outside our driveway, I snapped. I stormed into Hargrove's office, throwing the newspaper onto his desk. "Make it stop," I said. He looked at the headline, sighed, and folded his hands. "I can't control the press, Theodore. What I can control is how you handle this." "Meaning what?" "Meaning," he said carefully, "you and your brother need to make a statement, publicly. The longer you stay silent, the more the world will write your story for you." I shook my head. "He won't talk to anyone." "Then perhaps you should," he said. I froze. "Me?" He leaned forward. "You understand the situation. You're articulate. You're the only one who hasn't vanished." For a moment, the thought tempted me, standing in front of cameras explaining everything, showing the world that I wasn't just the other brother. That I was part of the story, too, maybe even the one holding it together. But then guilt cut through the thought like glass. This wasn't my secret to explain. Not entirely. I left his office without saying another word. That night, I drove out to Ethan's new place, a small cabin surrounded by tall pines, isolated, quiet. When I knocked, he didn't answer. When I called his name, his voice came from inside, low and tired. "Go away, Theo." "It's me," I said. "I just want to talk." The door opened halfway. He looked like a ghost, unshaven, eyes hollow. "I told you to stay out of this." "Ethan, they're tearing Mom apart online. They're saying she was—" "I know what they're saying," he interrupted. "And I don't care." "You don't care?" I stepped forward. "They're dragging our entire family through the mud and you're just hiding out here?" He slammed the door open the rest of the way. "What do you want me to do, Theo? Smile for the cameras? Tell the world I'm the bastard son of a dead billionaire?" His words hit hard. He wasn't shouting out of pride, but it was pain. Raw, deep, human pain. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't ask to be found. I didn't ask to be anyone's symbol or story. I didn't have a response. For a long time, we just stood there. Two broken silhouettes framed in the cold porch light. Then he looked at me, eyes red. "Take it," he said softly. "What?" "The inheritance. The trust, whatever. I don't want it anymore. I can't live under his name, Theo. You want it? It's yours." He turned away before I could answer. The door closed slowly, quietly, finally. The next few days blurred. Reporters still called, headlines still multiplied, and the whispers only grew louder. The Carter scandal had become a full-blown storm. My inbox flooded with messages, journalists, investigators, and even distant relatives I didn't know existed. And through all of it, one email stood out. It came late one night long after midnight. No subject line. No sender name, just an anonymous address. The message was short. I know what happened to Arthur Lennox. Meet me. No one else needs to know. My first thought was that it was a prank, but something about the phrasing, the confidence in it, felt real. I read it again, and again, until my pulse started to match the rhythm of those words. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Outside, the wind rattled the window, whispering against the glass like a warning. For weeks, I'd been chasing answers about what Arthur Lennox did. But now, someone was offering me the one thing I didn't even know I needed, the truth about how he died. I stared at the screen, my cursor hovering over the reply button. Every instinct told me to delete it. But curiosity, that same dangerous pulse that had guided me from the beginning, wouldn't let me. So I started typing. "Who are you?" I hit send. The message disappeared into the dark, and in the reflection of the monitor for just a second, I thought I saw movement behind me, a shadow crossing the window. Arthur didn't just die. He was silenced. The reply came the next morning. No greeting, no name, just a line of text and an address in the city. "If you want to know the truth about Arthur Lennox, come alone. 11 a.m., Old Lennox Tower, 14th floor. I don't know what I expected when I got there. The building looked abandoned. A skeleton of glass and steel, its name still faintly etched above the doors. Lennox Holdings. Inside, the air smelled like rust and dust. Elevator cables hummed weakly as I pressed the button for the 14th floor. Each floor that passed felt heavier than the last, like I was rising through layers of buried history. When the doors opened, a single office light flickered at the end of the hall. Behind a desk sat an older man, gray suit, thin frame, papers neatly stacked in front of him. He looked up as I entered. "You must be Theodore," he said. "I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Name's Henry Mallory. I was Arthur Lennox's accountant for 23 years, until the day he died." He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He opened a worn briefcase and pulled out a folder so old it was nearly falling apart. "These," he said, "are copies of documents Arthur drafted a few months before his death. They were never filed officially." I leaned forward. "What kind of documents?" "Amendments," he said simply. "To his trust. He was changing it, merging all of his assets into a single foundation meant to benefit both his sons equally." I froze. "Both?" He nodded. "Ethan and you." He slid one of the papers across the desk. The handwriting was unmistakable. Arthur's signature at the bottom, clear as day. "Proposed transfer of Equity Lennox Holdings, St. Helena's Trust. Beneficiaries, Ethan Carter and Theodore Carter. Equal allocation upon confirmation of identity." I ran my fingers over the ink, my throat tightening. "He wanted to make things right," I whispered. Henry nodded slowly. "Yes, but he never got the chance." "What do you mean?" He sighed, leaning back. Arthur was planning to announce the change in late 2010. 2 weeks before that, he fell down the stairs of his estate. Officially, it was ruled an accident. But the night before, he'd told me someone had been tampering with his records. "Someone?" I echoed. He hesitated. He didn't name anyone. Only that someone close to him had warned him not to proceed. When I tried to locate the final signed copies after his death, they were gone. The vault was empty. My stomach dropped. Gone? Destroyed or hidden. I filed a report, but the investigation went nowhere. Until now. He opened another envelope and pulled out a faded letter. It was from my mother. The header read Elena Carter, Personal Correspondence. The date, October 2010. My hands trembled as I read it. "Arthur, please don't do this. If you make this public, you'll ruin everything. My family will fall apart. Our sons will grow up hating each other. Please let me protect them. Let me protect what's left of us." At the bottom, her signature. Clean, familiar, final. I sat there in silence, the paper shaking in my hands. My mother, the woman who had begged us to stop digging, had hidden the very truth we'd been chasing. Henry spoke softly. She wasn't trying to steal. She was trying to keep the peace. Arthur told me he respected her decision, but a few weeks later he was dead. My voice came out small. You think she had something to do with it? He shook his head. No, I think she loved too deeply, and that love became her curse. She wanted to protect you both from each other, not destroy him. I stared at the letter until the ink blurred behind tears. For years, I'd thought Mom was the one holding us back. Now I realized she was the only one trying to hold us together. That night, I went home and opened the box of old family things Mom kept in the attic. Inside were letters, photos, keepsakes, all the fragments of a life built on quiet lies. At the bottom, I found another letter. This one was addressed to Ethan. The handwriting was hers. My dear Ethan, if you ever find this, I hope you'll understand. Arthur wanted the world to know the truth, but I wanted to protect what little normal life we had. You deserved peace, not questions. You both did. Love doesn't always come with honesty. Sometimes it hides, not to deceive, but to keep the pieces from falling apart. I folded the letter slowly, my chest heavy. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion. Maybe she had been right. Maybe the truth wasn't meant to fix anything. It was past midnight when I heard the knock. Soft at first, then louder. When I opened the door, Ethan was standing there. Rain soaked his jacket. His eyes were dark, hollow, but alive in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. We need to talk, he said. I stepped aside to let him in. He stood by the window, dripping water onto the floor. I saw the news, he said quietly. All of it. About Mom, about Lennox. I know it's bad, Theo, but it's not the end. I stayed silent, unsure what to say. He turned to face me. I went back to the orphanage today, he said. To the vault. I found something you missed. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was one of Arthur's final notes, written in that same precise hand. If you're reading this, it means my sons have finally found their way to each other. Whatever they believe about me, know this. I never wanted to divide them. The world will try to. Don't let it. Ethan's voice broke. He wanted us to share it all. The money, the name, the truth. I stared at him, the weight of everything between us pressing down. For a moment I thought he'd come to fight, but instead he looked ready. Tomorrow, he said, we go public. Together. No more lies. No more hiding. We tell the truth, all of it. He took a deep breath. Are you with me? I nodded slowly. For the first time I was. But somewhere deep inside I couldn't shake one question if Arthur Lennox had been silenced once. Who would want to silence the truth now that we were about to speak it? The money built walls between us. The truth finally tore them down. The morning after Ethan showed up, the world felt still. Not peaceful, just quiet in that heavy way that follows a storm. Outside, the city was waking up, headlines flashing, stories spinning, people moving on. But for us, everything had stopped. We spent that morning sitting at the kitchen table. Our brothers, one story, too much truth between us to pretend anymore. The rain had washed the world clean, but it hadn't erased what we'd done or what we'd learned. I've made my decision, Ethan said finally. He unfolded a letter he'd drafted in his own careful handwriting. It was addressed to Hargrove and Associates, marked Final Declaration of Estate Use. He looked at me before reading it aloud. I'm donating half the inheritance to St. Helena's, to rebuild it, to give those kids what I never had, a home with a name that means something. I just stared at him. Half? He nodded. Arthur wanted legacy, not guilt. He gave us both. Maybe it's time I choose which one I live with. For a moment, I couldn't speak. There was no envy left, only respect and maybe the faint, fragile beginnings of pride. When he handed me the pen, I signed my name beneath his. For once, we weren't fighting over the same fortune. We were building something together. 2 weeks later, construction began at St. Helena's. The orphanage, once a forgotten ruin, came alive with noise, hammer strikes, laughter, and the scent of new paint. Children from nearby shelters started visiting every day, curious about the home being reborn. Mom came, too, standing quietly near the gate, eyes glistening as she watched Ethan talk to the workers. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, but lighter, too. I thought the truth would destroy us, she said softly. But maybe it's the only thing that kept us from disappearing. I didn't answer. I just took her hand. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words. It just needs time, presence. Weeks later, while sorting through the last boxes from the vault, Ethan found something strange. A small metal tin labeled simply, "For my sons." Inside was a USB drive. We plugged it into my laptop. The file inside was dated October 3, 2010, 1 week before Arthur Lennox's death. A video began to play. Arthur sat in a dimly lit study, the same one I'd seen in old photos. He looked older than I expected, tired but composed. His voice was calm, deliberate, like a man finally saying what he'd carried too long. "If you're seeing this," he began, "then I've failed to say it in person. There are things men like me never learn to confess until it's too late." He paused, his gaze steady, direct, like he was looking right at us. "I've built empires, but none of them could replace what I lost. You are my legacy, not the companies, not the buildings, not the money. You were both born of love, though in different ways. And love doesn't always look like honesty." He exhaled slowly. "To my first son, Etha, I left you what I could. To my second, Theodore, I left you what I couldn't. You will understand that one day." He smiled faintly, that kind of smile that breaks and heals you at the same time. "The world divides by bloodlines, by names, by laws. But what defines a family isn't who we come from, it's who we become for each other. If you find this, promise me you'll do what I couldn't. Stand together, even when the world gives you every reason not to." The screen flickered once, then faded to black. Ethan sat beside me, silent. Neither of us moved for a long time. Then he said quietly, "He knew this would happen. All of it." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he just knew us." Months passed. The headlines faded. The noise quieted. And St. Helena's rose from its ashes, not as an orphanage, but as something new. A golden plaque hung above the freshly painted gates. Lennox Family Home. For every child who deserves a name. The first day it opened. Sunlight poured through the windows, landing on walls painted soft yellow and white. Children ran through the hallways, their laughter echoing against the same stones that once carried whispers and sorrow. Ethan stood beside me, his tie crooked, his eyes wet. "Think he'd be proud?" he asked. I smiled. "I think he already was." Mom joined us a moment later, holding a small bouquet of lilies. She laid them beneath the plaque, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe an apology. Hargrove was there too, of course. He watched from a distance, hands clasped behind his back, that faint, knowing smile on his face. When he caught my eye, he nodded once, a gesture that said, "It's done." That night, after the ceremony, Ethan and I walked through the corridors one last time. The smell of fresh paint mixed with candle wax. The lights glowed softly in the windows, reflecting off the wet cobblestones outside. We stopped at the very end of the hall, the same place where we'd once found the ledger, the same door to the old vault. It was sealed now, welded shut. Ethan rested his hand on the cold metal. "Strange," he said, "that this is where everything began." I nodded, and ended. He smiled faintly. "No, Theo, this is where it finally made sense." We stood there in silence, brothers again, not by blood, not by chance, but by choice. Outside, the night was calm. The world had moved on, and for the first time, so had we. As we walked out through the front gates, I turned back one last time. The golden plaque shimmered in the light of the lanterns, and I read the words aloud, quietly to myself. Lennox, Family Home. For every child who deserves a name. In that moment, I realized something. The money had divided us. The lies had broken us. But the truth, the brutal, complicated, liberating truth had finally brought us home. In the end, it wasn't the $70 million that changed everything. It was finally knowing who we really were,